So if you think of the floating cities that are very futuristic and looking like, those are things that we work on. We're in the process of writing the first waterfront code for New York City. So there is a lot of opportunity, I think, in this space, particularly at this moment in time where climate adaptation is a trending theme in much of our work. And you think about the waterfront as perhaps the most vulnerable typology that there is, where sea levels rising, there's flooding concerns and considerations. And so we're, whether formally trained or on the job trained, we're all trained to look at, what are the vulnerabilities? How do we protect against them in our day-to-day working on the waterfront? So that translates very seamlessly to even upland typologies where maybe it's a landlocked site, but there are flooding concerns right now, especially with the climate changing.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Foret.
And I'm Justin Neagle, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Dena Prastos, the founder and CEO of Indigo River, a woman-owned design firm leading the way in progressive waterfront architecture, resiliency, and climate adaptation. Trailblazing a new industry category, Dena is the first waterfront architect specializing in client adaptation solutions and integrated design, engineering, and technology to address challenges at the water's edge. Indigo River operates as a one-stop shop for climate adaptation, waterfront infrastructure, and resiliency projects. They guide their clients through all project phases, from ideation to construction and operations. As a leading authority in New York Harbor and beyond, they have notable projects such as East Side Coastal Resiliency in Manhattan, Robert De Niro's Wildflower Studios in Astoria, River Ring in Williamsburg, and Harlem River Greenway in East Harlem, to name a few. And with all that said, Dena, welcome to the show.
Hi, Justin. Thank you for having me. Hi, Will.
How you doing?
I laugh simply because the two of you know that I don't know how to say your last name very well. After, 38 takes, I got it right. So at least right-ish. So we're good. We're in a better place now. But nonetheless, tell us the real story. So I gave some awesome highlights, but tell us, about you and Indigo River.
Sure. So I have a academic background in architecture, and have an undergrad 5-year bachelor's degree in architecture, and then a master's in civil engineering. And my career path that I took was through the construction industry, the engineering industry, and then finally full circle to architecture, and decided to launch a firm specializing in what I had experience in, which is waterfront architecture and infrastructure.
Okay, so you went the engineering architecture route and then decided to start a company because, tell us, why did you want to start a company?
So the experience that I had early in my career, both in construction and engineering, it started out just as a kind of happenstance project. I was put on a waterfront project, and quickly, within a couple of years, learned how nuanced working on the waterfront is through the lens of construction. I was on a design build project in Staten Island, the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, and I began seeing the specialty services that were required and the kind of niche areas of expertise that I was getting experience in. And so the next company that I worked at 6-7 years later was a marine engineering firm. And similarly, it was working on all different waterfront typologies. Often I was the only kind of architect in the room. I wasn't licensed at the time, but I was seeing a lot of other engineers and super specialized engineering tracks, coastal, marine, dive engineers. But these waterfront open public spaces often were not being coordinated by an architect. And I have the kind of master planner, Renaissance architect vision in my head about how an architect operates, and saw the opportunity for me to start my agency as an architect in these types of geophysical properties. And so maybe different to a lot of architects that specialize on programmatic types like hospitals or things like that. I decided very intentionally to focus on a geophysical property, which is where nature meets man-made, where dry meets wet, and have now grown a company. We're 20 people. We have engineers, we have architects, we have planners. We have, within engineering, we have marine architects, coastal architects, many different types of engineering, environmental engineering. And within planners, we have urban planners, waterfront typology planners. And within architects, we have naval architects that focus on floating assets. We have landscape architects, and of course, traditional kind of building and infrastructure architects that round out our team.
Okay. So what I just heard is they're not dime a dozen, because this is the first time that we've had anyone on the waterfront maritime in terms of architecture goes. And we've done quite a few episodes. So how do you find these people? Or do you have to just train everyone that comes to you? Just whatever you did in school, forget it. And now you got to start over. How does that work?
So I think there's a lot to be said for what is learned in school, and even more to be said for what's learned in practice in the field. And so the types of talent that we attract now, on the engineering side, it is already more specialized. We have a lot of specialties that, people come out of school in whether it's civil or environmental or whatever the sub-discipline is, they're already specialized. Within architecture and planning, it's not as common. And so I'd say the types of architects and types of planners that we attract do have a very deep-seated appreciation for nature. Many have dual majors in environmental sciences and architecture, and it's a company that is unlike many others because we really are passionate about blurring the lines and having kind of this Venn diagram of individuals and their specialties and their vantage points and how they see the built environment. So it's not that there's any degree you can go get for waterfront architecture, waterfront infrastructure, but ours is a company that's focused on the types of programmatic projects that we get. So we get, marina projects, we get port projects, ferry terminals, ferry landings, park facilities on the water, floating projects. So if you think of the floating cities that are very futuristic and looking like, those are things that we work on. We're in the process of writing the first waterfront code for New York City. So there is a lot of opportunity, I think, in this space, particularly at this moment in time where climate adaptation is a trending theme in much of our work. And you think about the waterfront as perhaps the most vulnerable typology that there is, where sea levels rising, there's flooding concerns and considerations. And so we're, whether formally trained or on the job trained, we're all trained to look at, what are the vulnerabilities? How do we protect against them in our day-to-day working on the waterfront? So that translates very seamlessly to even upland typologies where maybe it's a landlocked site, but there are flooding concerns right now, especially with the climate changing.
So where did the blend of being mission-driven, right? Like there's a mission-driven component to this, as well as a entrepreneur, it's very blue ocean, right? Like you don't have, you're just not lines and lines of waterfront architects. So where does that blend kind of meet?
So I think for us, I saw it as an opportunity. Certainly having worked for larger firms, the two firms I worked at before launching, or two of the firms that I worked at before launching for most of my career, were firms that were often the prime on a contract, and were always hiring small, whether they're women-owned or minority-owned, veteran-owned businesses. And I really saw an opportunity as the prime in this space, especially for specialized areas of focus, to offer these services, because we were in the position as a prime looking to satisfy, oftentimes you can imagine much of our work is government run, looking to satisfy criteria for women-owned or veteran-owned or minority-owned, and not finding the types of contractors and the type of consultants that we needed. And so we saw very early on, before I launched, there was an opportunity in this space to be specialized and to offer these services on these types of contracts. And so sure enough, launched and didn't really have to have, we hired our first couple clients on a retainer basis, but beyond that, we got certified as a women-owned business and kind of hit the ground running with the opportunities that were available to us. And I would say the entrepreneurial side, yes, we're mission-driven, but the entrepreneurial side is identifying the opportunity and believing in the need for it. And we have since launched kind of partner companies and businesses that veteran-owned and minority-owned that offer complementary services, and we can offer, construction cost estimating and scheduling and sequencing, which for any project is a lot, but for the waterfront is very specific and nuanced to what is needed on the waterfront, what types of equipment, how to work in the tide cycles, what is allowed by environmental and regulatory agencies. So there's a lot of restrictions and constraints that come with working on the waterfront, any way you slice it, whether in design or in construction or in operations and maintenance. So we saw a way to offer services through different avenues, but all again related to the waterfront and that area where land meets water and man-made meets nature and kind of so on.
Did you think starting the company that you would be writing code for the largest city in the country? Is that part of the vision when you were?
It wasn't my first thought,
vision boarding this thing.
Certainly knew there was a need because we had experienced it as a need. Kind of the way New York City operates or has operated historically is that the waterfront doesn't go to Department of Building to get a building permit. It goes to the Department of Small Business Services, just the way that the waterfront is managed, maintained, and operated in New York City historically. And what the agency was trying to do for a very long time was apply the building code to waterfront typologies, which in many ways just doesn't work. And it's not black and white as code is supposed to be. And so it was kind of a constant battle and unpredictable process trying to get that last stage permit from the equivalent of the building department. And so it was a known need, and it was a larger project. We're a sub-consultant on the team, but we are specializing in the waterfront, specializing on the architectural chapters of the waterfront code. So it wasn't the first thought, but happy to be a part of it and happy to kind of get this experience under our belt.
So, since you're doing all this work for really the city, is this something that can be learned at school, or is this something that can only be learned at the job, essentially through experience?
I think over time definitely can be learned through an academic setting in school. I think a lot about how professions have evolved. I serve on the National Council for Architecture Registration Boards, the licensing body for architects nationally that facilitate licensure with each of the states. And we parallel often to the engineering industry and how their licensure has evolved over time. And you think historically, kind of when it was, maybe 5 different disciplines of engineering, there was civil and there was electrical and there was mechanical, and kind of how many fields of engineering have then spawned. And now there's, under civil, you could say there's environmental and all of these marine disciplines, marine and coastal. And we have a professional engineer diver that goes underwater and inspects structures. And there are all these specialties that have evolved out of engineering and the professional engineers. Architecture doesn't have that. There's just kind of one general architecture license. And so I think in terms of specialization, the field itself hasn't quite primed for specialization. Not to say that there isn't a need and there isn't a benefit to the public by doing that, but I think I'm kind of operating on the periphery, and pun intended, on the edge of what architecture is. And that's something that certainly there's more opportunity for, because if you look at kind of these extreme situations, like I said, on the waterfront, very vulnerable, there's a lot of lessons to be learned that can then be applied to other sites that aren't waterfront sites, but that ability to work very comfortably with water certainly translates to, flood prone areas and what flood mitigation measures can be installed on an upland site or a landlocked site. So I do believe there's a lot of benefit. But to answer your original question, is there a program that you can go get, specialized in waterfront architecture? No, I believe there are other specialties that maybe are a little bit further advanced, where there are, like healthcare specialization courses or masters or certification programs that one can go through. But as far as, architecture and the climate and waterfront, no.
So are you having to then train all your people?
So we do train. Many come, like I said, with some awareness around the environment, either a dual degree or, they might have been on one project that they really love for specific reasons, and that passion kind of sparks and aligns with what we're doing. And so training on the job, it's, we hope everyone's learning on every job, but it comes very naturally to us. And many of the people that we've attracted are people who we've worked with on past jobs that are waterfront sites that have an awareness around what it means to work on the waterfront.
So for anyone that is trying to specialize, the first client is usually the hardest, and then it goes from there. Was getting the first client the hardest thing for you, or was it something else?
So the first client was not hard for us because we had good working relations, and we had, non-solicitations, non-competes with our former employers that we were honoring in setting up. And in truth, we weren't competing because we were not offering engineering or architecture services from day one. And so we were able to start by offering owner's rep services for construction management and for other things that complement what we do and evolved into architecture and engineering on the waterfront. But we were able to do that in a way that gave us kind of runway to grow our team and to find the right opportunities where we could specialize and continue to grow and evolve. I think probably one of the harder things was a break point of, as a principal, as a productive principal, doing the work ourselves versus, training the people and offloading that. A couple years in, I realized I didn't have to renew my AutoCAD license. I didn't have to do certain things. And those, milestones that I think are important because, yes, I'm an architect, but I'm not in CAD. I'm never drafting. I'm not doing certain things. I'm kind of in a different position where I'm managing people that, yes, now we have a more vertical structure. But it took some concerted steps and efforts to get away from, I'll just do it. It's easier for me. It's quicker for me as a business leader to grow in that direction.
Do you still provide input for big projects, or you do?
Yes, absolutely. But it's at what intervals I'm involved. Again, I'm not doing necessarily the productive day to day and the minutes and the agendas, but I am weighing in on the bigger decisions and the broad brush strokes of, the direction of projects.
Can you give some examples of, I imagine that letting go had to be kind of hard. Is that true? Let me start with that.
Yes, it is. And it's especially hard when things don't go the way that, I would have done them. But that's part of growth, and that's part of other people learning also, is you learn by failing, and that's just a truth. And you learn a lot better than doing the right thing is doing the wrong thing and learning from it. And so that is a kind of way that we operate, as we give people the runway and the opportunity and the room to fail and to make the decisions and to go on their instinct, not in a uncoordinated and uncontrollable way. I mean, we're careful about it, but we have regular check-ins. We're giving people room to make the decisions, though, and not micromanaging. Kind of wanted to stay far away from micromanaging.
So can you give us some examples of where, you're letting go, it didn't work, or it's not going exactly the way you imagine, but it still worked well? And also counter to that, because I think that's the easier example, is where it didn't work so well, and how did you manage through that?
Sure. So an example of it going well. So I, early on in the company, started a kind of a template of a flood resiliency report and a flood emergency action plan, and kind of put into template form, for one specific project initially, and then built on it, and was expecting these templates to be kind of plug and play. Yes, specific to different projects, different sites, different constraints, different risks, but thought it would be relatively quick to get these kind of updated and, follow a process and kind of bang them out for multiple projects. And it was, but one of the things I found is we have a lot of really great people on our team, and you can go down the rabbit hole, and we kind of had to find the right threshold for where to cut off and the level of detail, the level of information, the amount of research that really, constitutes due diligence. And so that was something where the report has been refined time over time, and it's in a good place now, but it's getting a comfort with what amount of time is too much and what amount of time is not enough, and how are we, maintaining responsible control, but not blowing a budget on a given project that's unnecessary. And so that has happened with, I think, some of these reports. A time where it hasn't gone well, let me think. So early on, we wear many hats, especially architects. We can do everything. Well, we can do everything, and it can charge a lot to do everything. And so early on, we figured out that some of the individuals we had at, different rates, to different billable rates, just wasn't efficient to have them, whether it was drafting or modeling or whatever it was. And so figuring out, and maybe a little late on some projects, but figuring out at what threshold we need to outsource some of that work took some time. And so I think it's hard, especially in early stages of a company. you value people's time, you value what you're paying them. Sometimes you can discount what you value yourself and your own time. And so something that I think, all right, it takes me 10 minutes just to manipulate in CAD and get it back out, can't scale that for everyone in the company. And there is a threshold where that QA, QC and the markups and the red lines and the revision cycles need to be documented, and it starts to take longer. But there's also a threshold in which we can outsource a lot of that and keep in-house the higher decision-making abilities, but outsource a lot of the kind of mechanical tasks.
So as you're continuing to scale, really the only way to be able to scale is to continue letting things go. How do you hold people accountable to the things that you let go?
So we have regular check-ins. We have a clear kind of organization structure and hierarchy, and we have regular check-ins. Everyone on the team has a check-in, not with every principal or with every executive, but we do have regular check-ins where it is clear what are the hot items, what are the long lead items, and there's a natural tracking that occurs with those. There's minutes that are taken, and when things start to go awry, we do implement performance improvement plans. And so that's something where, all right, you missed something, it happens, or it wasn't communicated that something slipped in priority or perceived to have slipped in priority, and something slipped through the cracks. All right, it happens once, happens twice, you get kind of verbal wording, what happened here, let's talk about it. Continues to happen, or we start to identify a pattern, and then we're putting into place a performance improvement plan, because it's not the goal for the person to fail, but it's also important to understand, why is this happening? Is it a developmental action plan that needs to go into place, or is it something that's reflected on us, that we're not giving them the tools they need to succeed, and just to get to the bottom of it and work in the right direction so that the issue is resolved and also the individual is developed.
I know I'm about to open up a can of worms with what you said, so I'm going to ask for your opinion on, do PIPs work?
They can. They don't always. Sometimes it's a flag that, and one of the things we say is hire slow, fire fast. So they don't always work. And sometimes we like to have patience. We like to understand different circumstances and extenuating circumstances in particular, but they don't always work. But we do exercise due diligence and document throughout.
Without breaking, obviously, any type of confidentiality, what do you see? What do you see in terms of the PIP, why it works, and then why it doesn't work? Let's start with the why it works.
So times where we've seen it work, and the reasons why I think it has worked is because the message is very clear, it's measurable, it's actionable. We can get through kind of step by step understanding what the goal is and how to achieve it. And so when things start to become missed, sometimes it's a reflection on management. Sometimes it's the manager's not being clear in what's being asked, or giving mixed signals, mixed communication. So sometimes it's on us. But sometimes when it's not, when it doesn't work, it's the employee, it's just not resonating what the priority is, or what the expectation is, what the caliber, what the quality, what the quantity, whatever it is that we're trying to measure, they're not hitting that mark, and they're not communicating. And that can be a thing too, where we have people who are, experts in different softwares, and I'm not an expert in some of these softwares. So I don't know how long something will take. And I'm trusting everyone to be responsible. And we do have a culture of trust in our team, which can be taken advantage of. Absolutely. But we are highly communicative around what the expectations are, what the goals are. And if we need to screen share and shadow and watch and understand what the production is on something, we can do that.
Last question on this thread, excuse me, on this thread, because I just find this super fascinating. If you don't know, right, you're not expertise on, say, the software or whatever, how do you gauge, right, then what is? Because if you don't have, let's say, direct experience with it, then how do you figure that out so that you have age or number or metric? Like, how do you then figure that out if you don't have direct experience with it?
So we have kind of a hierarchy and a senior level of leadership that maybe doesn't have direct experience in the latest software, but they know enough and they've practiced long enough in the industry that they have some awareness around it. And so even if it's something that it might not be in-house, it might be something that we send a surveyor out to collect some information. We know generally enough about what needs to be done that even when we have a sub-consultant give us a number, we'll say, wait, this is, astronomically more than we thought. what's going on here. This is what we actually need, and kind of talk through the mechanics of the step-by-step, what is needed to achieve this. And sometimes there are things that we just don't know and they're justifiable. And other times it's kind of calling BS on something.
You seem very comfortable as a CEO, right? You seem very much like you love that, which becomes struggling sometimes when you have somebody that is an architect or is an engineer or is in construction, and they're like, I can just do it better. And then they go off to go do their own thing and then realize, shit, like there's a lot more things that are involved here than just doing a great job, right? So do you find that you just really enjoy that side maybe more than the architect engineering side?
I will say I've worked in some, maybe it's out of my experience, and I've had poor experiences where I didn't feel like I was trusted, or I didn't feel like I was given room to achieve my potential, or whatever it was. That, again, I'm very open. My business partner is open. The principals are open to having conversation and kind of walking through things together, that our assumptions might be wrong, but we're very transparent in our culture. We're very open about, when things go well and when things don't go well, and we don't penalize when things don't go well. It's all right, let's learn from it as a team. We're not pointing the finger, we're figuring out a solution, and then we're going back and, what were the lessons learned? And so it is, I think, a reflection of the culture. But me personally, I do greatly enjoy developing our team.
No, it's very obvious based on your answers there. Very, they're very smart. How do you come to agreements on disagreements, right? So you said you have other principles. Like I assume that everybody has some form of say in some way or another. So how do you get to the decisions when maybe the two sides are not seeing eye to eye?
So I'm trying to think of real disagreements we've had at senior levels, and there aren't many. I would say my business partner and I are fairly well aligned, and we have different opinions on things. Sometimes we'll talk them through, and sometimes it's, I think, like in a marriage, you kind of pick your battles of, what's really important and why. Always a culture of respect, and we don't have to agree on things, but sometimes we'll bring in other expertise, outside expertise, whether it's, another person internal to the company or someone outside of the company, whether it's outside counsel or an accountant or whatever the issue is. Or if it's, a design detail that we just don't agree on, and his experience was in the field doing one thing and my experience was in the field doing another thing, we'll call our networks. We'll say, hey, we're running into this issue. We're kind of thinking these two things. What do you think? And you just get that advice in-house.
Got it. So how helpful is that third party, whether it internally or externally, that you've seen? It's just seeing somebody else's point of view, that when you're trying to come to a conclusion. Obviously, having a consultant come in, the value, I've said this tons of times, the value a consultant brings is they're not in the business, right? So like they're looking at it very objectively. Like they're just saying like, this is how it works. Like this is how the pieces fit, compared to like, well, Bob does this and Judy does this, and there's this whole dynamic of thing. And like, it's like all that's thrown away because like they have no concept of it. So where do you how often do you see the value of bringing that third party in?
Pretty often. And it's not always that we're paying, an outside consultant for the service. Sometimes it's our network, it's our resources, people who we've worked in the past, people who we respect in the industry. So it's not always that we're paying for it, but I would say more often than not, when we go outside to get an opinion or advice on something, it is helpful, even if it's, all right, now we both changed our mind, we're definitely not doing it, or whatever it is. Sometimes it's hearing it back from an outside party that allows us to recalibrate or reframe.
No, totally. That makes perfect sense. So then have you built out processes for not just obviously like, this is our process to use AutoCAD, or this is our process to that, but like, have you built out processes for business items of inside business? Like, this is how we make decisions. This is like, when we look at cash flow or we look at our P&L, like this is how we do that. Like, what does that look like? And obviously since the beginning to today, how has that changed?
So we have built out some. Certainly we have more on our list that we would like to build out, and that I think is natural as we scale. But it started with 2 people, then 4 people, 8 people, kind of doubling every year. We're at 20 people, and we've seen some fissures. We've seen some cracks where, all right, we scaled a little too fast, or we need to roll this back, or we need to, someone needs to QC this it needs to be the same person looking at making sure it's standardized, whatever it is. And so some of that we've done, and some of it's, business practices and, invoicing cycles and things like that. Others are, design, development, QA, QC processes, and formatting and standards and controls and things like that we have developed. We certainly have more to go. And that, I think that comes with that letting go phase of, I know how I do it. I know how it looks good. I know how it's going to go out. I trust that I'm doing it. I'll have someone else look at it, but it's, a lot of consistency in what one person is producing. And then I guess as you scale, those assumptions that you're making aren't translated at every level. And so then you have to kind of go in and whether you're codifying them or standardizing them or whatever it is, we start to see where there are inconsistencies or something goes out and who looked at this. And it's, we have these reality checks that kind of bring us back to, all right, this needs to be a priority this year. We're standardizing this, or we're making this into a process, or this is a procedure for that, whatever it is.
How much does software play a part in your organization? There's everyone's using some version of AutoCAD, Revit, etc. But then there are, let's say, Enscape, or there's a lot of other engineering / architectural software that surrounds the major platforms. We all know what they are. So how much does software play a part in terms of making you more efficient or better than, let's say, another company that, let's say, would compete for the same business?
So to answer literally about the software, I think certainly it's a part of it. I think it's more a philosophy around the software, and we are firmly of the belief, and again, some of this comes out of my experience, that I felt like I got out of school, I had training in all the latest softwares, and then I wasn't allowed to get licenses for any of it. And I kind of had to degrade my work production to match whatever the company would support in terms of licensing software. And felt like that was, not the direction that was, I understood it from a business decision and processes and procedures, but for us, we are a young company. We're able to be more agile. We are dynamic. We are trusting of our individuals. And so we've trusted in our individuals to tell us, all right, this is software. It's going to make me more productive in this way. I don't know the software. I don't know how to use it, but we'll take the leap. We'll have a pilot project. We'll demo it. We'll see if it's worthwhile to train other individuals on it. And even as simple as kind of what we look at documents in, we have a divide in our company. We have the architects and the planners that swear by and will only use Adobe products, and with good reason. And I'm in that camp. We also have the engineers who will only use Bluebeam to do markups. And so we have a divide even internally in the company, and it works. We kind of give people the option. And that may come to a breaking point where we need to just standardize one. But so far, how we're operating, it works. And it's kind of the preference of the individual and what they are most proficient at and most productive in. And so that's something that we kind of take on a case by case, but we'll, make the case for it and go.
You mentioned growth or, scale earlier, and how it happens too fast when you double up and double up and double up, it can put the strain on, show the cracks. Where are some of those things that you have seen just historically? Obviously, you got from 2 to 4 to 8 to 20 at this point. What were some of those stories of we've grown too fast? People think growth's great, love growth, let's keep growing, grow. But in reality, there are limitations to that unless you have a stockpile of money sitting somewhere that you can just pour on it.
Yeah, no, I think one of the more important things that we do and that has helped us in that arena is not only looking kind of top down at what our potential is, but having annually, we have a meeting where we're very transparent with all of our information, what we set our goals together, where we stacked up against last year's goals, what the priority kind of side projects are, target areas, industry, market growth, things we'll kind of go through that very much feels like everyone is an owner. Everyone's giving their perspective. And the one year we did that, we do it every year, but one year we had done it and we had an opportunity. It was going into 2020, and we had the opportunity to go from, I think we were 4 people at the start of 2020 to 8. And it was like an overnight opportunity where we had the hires identified and we floated it to the team that this is an ownership. My partner and I, we were ready to go. We had kind of pedal to the metal. We had interviewed, we were ready to extend the offers. And in hindsight, thank goodness we didn't do this, because 2020 hit, a lot of things came to a halt, a whole nother podcast on how to navigate that. But we opened it up to our company and said, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you guys think? And it was, no, we need to get our systems in order. We have these things. If we do that, how are we going to, it was a lot of questions that we realized, okay, the assumptions that we're making aren't translating to every level, and we need to translate those before we grow, because it'll only become harder. And we didn't. We slowed our growth. and we grew deliberately in the areas that we wanted to. And we kind of have a direction every year, one or two directions that we hire target people in to round out our business services. And that was a really good time where we didn't, and we, continued to grow slowly, thought into what directions and how to control that growth.
So does that mean that, with controlled, so I'm going to use your words here. So with controlled growth, because I think every entrepreneur is pedal to the metal. I think that's just in their DNA. So how do you get, was it a compromise? Was it a sacrifice to slow down growth? Tell me about that.
So there's always a trade-off. And it might have been a completely different outcome or retrospect if, the pandemic didn't happen and we lost an opportunity, but it was an opportunity to grow in a slightly different direction than where we have ended up growing. And it wasn't a compromise. This is a contract. We can either take it or leave it, and put 4 people on a job site and grow that way. But it wasn't truly aligned to the vision of how we've ended up growing, the direction we ended up growing in. And that gave us the opportunity. Yes, it was a trade-off. It wasn't doubling our revenue in 1 year. It was a decision to focus in different business areas and grow more slowly in those areas while taking the time to refine, and I wouldn't use the term perfect, but refine some of our dealings and our processes, our procedures, our standards.
Okay. Justin, I think you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I obviously going to the team, right? Having this, hey, like this is the vision for the year. This is that. Are there checkpoints during the year that you're also saying like, hey, Q1's over, Q2's over, halfway through the year. This is where we're standing. Like, hey, we've already done these great things, or hey, we're behind here. Like, is that part of this process when you're, being candid with the team that way?
So we do. Generally, every year in February, we do kind of self-evaluations and employee reviews, and those. And in that process, we also get feedback on the company: what's been good, what hasn't been good, where do we need to improve, what are competitors doing, what's the word on the street. We kind of get a lot of information back, and then we synthesize that into we call it the State of the Onion, where we peel back the layers, but we bake it into a meeting that we usually have around Pi Day, March 14th. And we eat pie during our meeting. We go through and we're very transparent with, what the financial goals were, what we projected, what we hit. And that happens once a year. And we go through everything from, financials and strategy and lessons learned and hiring and culture, and kind of as much as we can cover in the day, we do. And it's very kind of Socratic. We have an agenda that we follow. We have a presentation that's prepared, but a lot of it is just to spark and have insight and conversation that we gather and then debrief on later as principals. The principals then meet biannually in person, but quarterly to get the updates on, all right, we set this goal. What are we tracking against that goal? Just more of the kind of factual information based on goals and any specific issues that are rising or any big strategic discussions that need to occur. The principals are meeting quarterly and really a little bit deeper semi-annually.
Got it. Okay.
When you were talking about the feedback, I'm curious, does the feedback from employees, do they also give feedback on their direct managers, or is it about the company overall?
All of the above. And some of that we allow to be like 360 feedback that isn't direct, never comfortable giving a review directly to the person you're reviewing kind of thing. So some of it is face-to-face, some of it's 360 feedback, and some of it on the company we do often via Mentimeter where we'll get information. It's kind of randomized, but it's in real time and there's a non-anonymity to it. So we can say, how would you describe our culture in one word? Those kinds of questions that we can start to get a word cloud together. And then they're also, what was your highlight of year? And some of those are more telling depending on the individual. But what is the low point? What do we need to work on? We kind of go through weaknesses, strengths, opportunities, threats, and crowdsource that information more anonymously.
How would you describe the culture in one word, Dena?
Respectful.
Okay. So obviously you're doing all this, so culture is important, right? You want to have a good culture. Going from a big entity into your own business. What were some of those thoughts that I'm sure there were things, and we're not bad mouthing in somebody else's culture, but like, I'm sure there were things that you wanted to be different. Like you wanted to say, this culture needs to look this way and be thought of this way. And we need to be intentional, right? Be intentional with it. What did that look like, when it was 2 of you? And now what does that maybe look different, maybe exactly the same today when it's 20?
Certainly just that, to be intentional, to be deliberate, to be thoughtful, to be respectful, and to be, I think one of the things about the architecture, engineering, construction industry as a whole is that the cultures and the businesses themselves often operate as kind of these antiquated monster machines, very slow to change, slow to adapt technology. We knew we wanted to be, and we knew the industry deserves to be more nimble, more agile, more flexible. And so those things are also embodied in our culture. So we are not so rigid that this is what we say and it's letter of the law and we're never going to change on it. No, give us an argument to change on it. We will. We'll talk through it, challenge our opinion. We don't want to be the smartest people. We want to hire the smartest people. So we'll have a discussion about it.
When you're having those discussions, it requires a certain level of trust to be able to have honest conversations. And in order to build that trust, it takes time to be able to trust that there isn't, let's say, lashback from the feedback or from constructive feedback from happening. How are you building trust, or how are your sort of leaders building trust within the company? And how are you accelerating that timeline so that it doesn't take years to build that trust? It takes a lot less.
Yeah, I think some of that is born out of how we grew, and we grew very organically. We didn't put up job postings and have a bunch of resumes to filter through. Much of our growth was through relationships that we had, whether working alongside, working under, working for. So my business partner and I, he hired me at one of my companies. And when I left, he said, if I ever leave, we're going to do something. We're going to go out on our own. I said, yeah, right. He was my boss at the time, 10 years my senior. I said, all right, whatever. And I left. And sure enough, a couple of years later, I was ready. He was ready. We launched. And many of our first hires also were, whether or not direct working relationships that we had working in the same company, we might have worked on a job together opposite each other, might have been a client, might have been a referral of someone that we worked with. But a lot of the early growth, I think very few of our employees came as a blank slate, kind of through a job, through a resume application, maybe one or two. But much of that, I think that trust, some of that was already built in because we weren't an employer when we had formed the relationship. We knew how each other operated. We knew each other's values. We knew the quality of each other's work. So a lot of that was baked in early on to our growth. And once you have that momentum and you have those relationships, it's kind of a magnetism, because the more people we hire, the larger our network becomes to continue to grow.
Definitely gave some very interesting answers. Give a lot to. What I can tell from our conversation is that there's a lot of intentionality in how you're organizing. Not to say that there were no failures, but I think you pivoted from just from what I can hear, you pivoted from the failures and then continued on, which is a sign of any great entrepreneur, is to be able to move on. So as you're growing, as you're scaling, how do you bring that intentionality? Because you can't do it just from one person, right? You might be pointing the North Star, but how do you grow that intentionality to other people within your organization?
So I think that we are mission driven. Some of that is a little bit on autopilot because we're all heading in the same direction. Sometimes we'll start to stray. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of a tangent. We'll rein them in, or they'll rein us out, whatever it is. But I think because of the work that we do and the passion behind the work, the realized value of what that work is, it's attracted a caliber of talent and a type of talent that we have been fortunate in who our team is and who our team has become. And we're also not putting a ceiling on anyone. And that, again, I think maybe from my experience, from my business partner's experience, felt like a ceiling was put on us unnecessarily or unjustly, and maybe because of, the systems and the hierarchy in some of the antiquated companies out there, larger scale multinational companies that need X to go there, need Y to do this. And again, understanding from a business perspective why those checks and balances are necessary, but also understanding the trade-off for some of those. Whereas we can be much more agile, we can be much more nimble, we can hire in a field engineer that we see the potential in and give him the slack to see, where does he take it, and he's knocking it out of the park in year 4. And no reason not to give him more responsibility, not to give him more. And yes, there may be moments which are risky, but measuring that risk, weighing that risk, managing that risk transparently, proactively, regularly has been what helps us. And so, yes, we have a North Star, some start to go awry, but we're largely marching in the same direction, or we're talking about the direction we're marching in, and we're prioritizing jointly, if we have limited resources, where those resources are deployed.
So obviously you've mentioned the old school methodology, the antiquated, life that is maybe exists in the AE space, and certainly the AEC space for sure. What's the vision you have? Like when you look at 3 years, 5 years deeper, down the road, where's Indigo, and like what is being done that is so different than what has been done in the past 100 years?
So I think some of that certainly is in the type of projects that we work on, and that it is a niche specialty area, and that we have the opportunity to develop responsibly in a very vulnerable area. And not every client is willing to do that. We still get the run-of-the-mill client that just wants to flip a property, and they don't care what the highest and best value or the best use of resources is. And that's hard, but it's a business where we offer business services, and we'll execute on what the client is paying us to do. But there are also other clients that we have a little bit more latitude to set more ambitious goals for a project than just what the 20-year life cycle or the 40-year life cycle is. There are other benefits that can come out of the built environment other than restoring what was previously there and failed. And so that, I think, again, as terms of mission driven, attracts a certain caliber of talent, but also gives us opportunity to continue exploring. Materialities changing so rapidly, technologies are changing so rapidly. We have a very diversified work staff that has different expertise within the team, all complementary and all focused around the waterfront. And so we continue developing depth in our vertical, while also kind of expanding the horizon of what we offer. And so I think we'll continue to do that. It's a really exciting moment in time where climate adaptation is suddenly more valued than it was a decade ago, and kind of look at how sustainability evolved as a theme or as a trend, how resiliency evolved as a theme or as a trend, understanding what climate adaptation work means in the built environment. I think we're kind of at the front of at least the newer vocabulary on what these things are and how to implement them.
What about the technology side? Where do you see, and maybe this might be more of the industry, like what do you see changing, right? So obviously AI, huge, big deal. Like how big of an impact do you see that having on Indigo, but then also just the space?
A tremendous amount. I think it'll be dampened or slowed by some of the regulatory processes that we have in place, but certainly there's opportunity to, 3D print biomimicry and spaces that can operate and sustain as a natural environment would, but they can be constructed, they can be man-made. So we can marry, the technological advances with the material advances and be on the fore of that as not as a trend, but as a kind of a staple of how we design in the future. And then I think there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity, not only in the technological kind of how we build, but also how we're collecting data back and how that data is informing our design process. And so whether it's, mapping 3D spaces underwater or flying a drone to get, what that mapping is, that's a lot more tangible now than it was a decade ago, just with material advances, but also the investments that, yes, we have professional engineer divers, but they can't get into every nook and cranny and every space under a, confined space in underwater. And so we can have a underwater drone that we fly to understand more and map it, and then make a more detailed and thoughtful decision earlier on in the process as to how we design a solution for that space.
That's, to me, all I think of is like the unbelievable technology aspect of like, yeah, we just take our drone, we throw it in the harbor, and then, we just go map out all of the underground, underwater environment, which is just, to me, is
we're shortcutting a lot of assumptions that used to take place in the process. That, all right, if it's this, we're going to do that, or we're going to wait and see what it is when we go down and start to deconstruct. Well, we don't need to do that anymore. We can, before we start designing, go and assess what the reality is and why it got to be that way.
And assumptions are expensive if they're wrong.
Yes.
Justin, I feel like we had a great conversation today.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have one last question, though, for you, Dena. So if you could go back 20 years, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
I don't know, maybe start earlier, start on my own entrepreneur, as in my own journey sooner.
Yeah. Well, if you were, so you said 18, right? Is that when the firm got started? 17, 18.
2018.
2018. So if you started even in 2010, right? So the additional 8 years, where would you guys be?
I don't know that we would be in the same place at all. I don't think we would. I mean, not even in, 10 more years on this trajectory or 6 more years on this trajectory. I think we are responsive to opportunities. And I mentioned kind of climate adaptation trending, and it kind of took a light bulb moment when someone was presenting to me of all these, I was a marine engineer presenting to me all these opportunities within the space. And I thought, well, yeah, those are opportunities. And that's, our team is doing this. Our team is doing that. We're the experts in this space. Why aren't we marketing ourselves as such? And it took kind of reframing it, hearing it from an outside perspective. And I think if we would have started, in 2010, 8 years earlier, we would have been responding to different conversations, different times, different trends, different funding opportunities in terms of, government funded projects. We do have a fairly balanced portfolio, and some of our, especially our early work, came out of private opportunities. And so it probably would have been, responding to what the opportunities were as much as continuing to pursue the passions that we have, which are around waterfront or nature meets man-made.
Yeah. All right. No, that's a good start earlier, right? That was the saying is, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago, second best time today. So no, it makes tons of sense. This has been great. This has been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the people before we say our goodbyes?
Maybe just something from my career that I think helped me launch and helped form the direction that we've come and where we're going, is to take note of the hardships, take note of the challenges, take note of the obstacles, because I feel like those are the biggest learning moments that can shape where the opportunities are. And that's what we found.
Good advice. Awesome. We'll throw all your show notes or all the social links in the show notes. Is there a way for people to get a hold of you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm active on some of the social medias, Instagram. And of course, through our website, we have an info query form. So absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, listeners, I hope you had just as good of a time as me and Will did. And until next time, adios.
Adios.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
keep building scale.
Scale.